are outside the Tesla dealership. I'm gonna pick up my man Bobby Llewellyn, have a little scrap with him. I see him actually, but he's nervous.
Good morning.
Robert Llewellyn.
Hello.
How are you?
Very good.
Good
Very
to
nice
see
to meet you. Very nice to meet you.
So,
Wow.
yeah, no, after all our harsh words on Twitter, it's good to actually see you personally.
I know, and guess how guilty and bad I feel. No, I'm sorry, I do look like an absolute tramp at the moment. I bashed my head on the kitchen door the other day, and then I'm shaved, and I'm just an absolute
I haven't
scruff,
shaved
mate.
either.
Yeah, but what? That's so unfair. You look like a really cool, cutting-edge kind of dude, and I do look like a tramp.
We're just a couple of electric car loving hillbillies right now.
I sure do love my electric car. The debate needs to happen, and it's often either some, you know, guy my age with a grey ponytail and solar panels on his roof, who's just 100%, you know, this is the only thing you should drive and everything else is a mortal sin, or Clarkson.
Yeah, exactly.
And
there's no shade of grey.
No, and there's quite a lot of room in the middle. It's a really complicated thing. The technology's complicated. The stuff we're used to, all the cars around us, you know, we're used to that. They're normal. Yeah. And we feel safe in them, and we know they're reliable and they don't break down. You know, but how important it is to particularly a lot of guys that their identity is through their car. And I don't think I think that's where I've got a missing gene. I don't understand football. Or
there's something wrong with you straight away then.
Yeah, I'm sick. Craig Charles says I'm sick and I need treatment.
You need help. You do.
He's offered to pay for it. You know, so there's something wrong with me.
Okay,
So,
cool. Well, I mean, let's talk about some of the issues I raised in the piece then. I think the first one, and the main one for me, is the price.
Yeah.
Now, the car we're in right now is a Nissan Leaf. Brilliant car.
It is a nice car, isn't it?
It's fabulous. But Nissan want £28,350 for the car. 28 grand. I mean, you can spend half that price, a third of that price, on something similar. You can get yourself a nice little Volkswagen Polo or a Fiesta for a lot less money. And I just can't bring myself to recommend. If my mum said to me, what car should I get? I want something relatively small. I couldn't recommend this car to me.
Right.
And even after the government give you £5,000 off as an incentive to take up electric cars, you're still looking at 23 grand. I mean,
it's an expensive car. There's no question about it. I mean, I think my only argument can possibly be, if they don't get cheaper, no one will buy them. Yeah. You know, and the only way they're going to get cheaper is for a company like Nissan. And I mean, I do take, if I wore a hat, I'd take it off of them, who've taken that risk, taken that jump, and installed the manufacturing base to do it. So if they don't get cheaper, then people aren't going to buy them. I absolutely agree with you. And I think, I mean, the analogy I use is mobile phones. That I'm old enough to remember when they first appeared, and I had a mate who was a very wealthy guy, property developer, and I rang him on his mobile phone because I wanted to see what it was like, from my landline that you had to dial like that. That call cost me £4.50, and that phone cost £5 grand. £5,000.
Yeah, you make a good point.
For a rubbish phone.
Okay, well, the other issue I brought up in the article was about running costs. Yeah. Now, when everyone thinks of electric cars, they think, oh, electricity, that doesn't cost a penny. I'll plug it into my house, and I'll charge my car up and off I go. I won't have to go to the petrol station and be tied to the oil networks, the infrastructure they've got there. But when you think about it, with the Nissan Leaf, what you're doing essentially when you're plugging your electric car into your home is it's the equivalent of boiling a kettle for like 8 hours overnight. And if you don't think that, you know, it's going to cost you some money, then you're a bit deluded in the head. The other issue as well is that when you buy a car like this, you're drawn to it by the fact that it has zero emissions and you care about the environment. That being the case, you're most likely, I would argue, to opt for an electricity package from a supplier that is carbon neutral. So there's an example, British Gas do one which costs 25 pence per kilowatt hour. It's more expensive than a normal package. So when you charge your Nissan Leaf overnight on that Future Energy Plus tariff, it costs 25 pence times 24. 24 is the battery capacity, 24 kilowatt hours. It costs £6 to charge this car overnight. The range of this car is about 100 miles. £6 to travel 100 miles. That's still not bad, but when you consider there are other cars, petrol cars, the Volkswagen Blue Motion. Very good car. Awesome car, yes. Which actually costs less.
Much less to buy in the first place.
And less to buy in the first place, yeah, but it costs I did the calculations, £5.64, I think, to go the same distance as you could in a Leaf. That costs £6 to go. Now, obviously it can be cheaper if you use dirty electricity, but if you're going for clean energy, it can end up costing you more than an ordinary petrol car. Not a lot of people know this. There's not enough. There's not enough
But not a lot of people know some other things, and here's one little counter argument.
Hit me. Not literally.
7.5 kilowatt hours per gallon, per US gallon, smaller than a British gallon. 7.5 kilowatt hours of electricity to produce 1 gallon of petrol. That's how much electricity a refinery uses. This is one of the problems we've got, is there's this mist of normality in front of us, which is what we're sitting in now, a traffic jam full of fossil fuel cars going tick, 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 tick. Burning fossil fuels, not moving. Rather a good point. What are we doing? We're doing nothing. We're not using any energy at all because we're sitting still. But we use a vast amount of dirty electricity, as it's called by the pro-oil lobby, to produce petrol. So you can only use the well-to-wheel argument if you use the pit-to-wheel argument for this car.
Absolutely.
So the pit-to-wheel argument for this car, absolutely fair. Nothing comes out of the back of this, but some carbon released in creating the energy for it.
Well, yeah, you got to dig for the coal.
You got to dig for the coal. You got to ship the coal from here. You got to burn it in a power station, get rid of the waste. You got the stuff going up the chimney. It's all awful. But you're doing exactly the same thing to make petrol, and you're drilling it and pumping it and storing it and refining it and pumping it and storing it and refining it. You know, they're a huge process. So, and that is the 3 times argument is the Royal Academy of Engineering's research into it.
Right.
And that's their estimate, because no one knows, and no one really knows. But so your average car is producing between 300 and 500 grams of CO2 per kilometre. An electric car, at the very, very worst, if you charge it from a coal-powered, power station in China with no filters on the chimney, it's about 100 grams per kilometre.
It's debatable though, isn't it? I mean, I don't want to agree.
Let's just do the cost thing. Let's do the cost thing, because the cost thing, I mean, I can only go on experience. I've driven a Mitsubishi i-MiEV 9,000 miles, and my electricity bill, and this is guesswork, but it's between, I'd go up to 120, about 100 and 120 quid to drive 9,000 miles. Now, I do charge it 90% of the time at night on off-peak, what's it called, economy 7 electricity, which is about 2p per kilowatt hour, isn't it? 2 or 3 pence a kilowatt hour. So that is from E.ON, which is not a super hyper green company, so it is cheap. But in real terms, I've driven 9,000 miles for I'd even go as far as saying 150 quid because of the times we've charged it in the daytime.
Right.
When we've driven out and come back and plugged it in, which is generally we don't do, but it certainly has happened. That's a Blue Motion Polo Blue Motion is 400 quid for the same distance.
Yes,
and a Porsche Cayenne, which is my favourite, is 3,800. I did the maths. So we can batter each other with maths till we're blue in the face.
I hope you're not comparing your Mitsubishi to a Porsche
with a
now.
Porsche Cayenne. Definitely, they're very comparable vehicles.
Well, we talked about the emissions argument, and yes, electric cars do use some form of energy that burns coal, that it causes CO2.
It's only 40% of the national grid in this country, coal burning.
Yeah, but the rest is
nuclear, renewable, and natural gas.
Natural gas, which also emits CO2.
Also emits CO2.
Yes,
but not as much as coal.
Not quite as much, but it's still a dirty fuel in the grand scheme.
I mean, the 2 estimates I've seen that I'm most convinced by is 40 grams of CO2 per kilometre for an electric vehicle charged on the national grid in this country. Okay,
my calculations, I'm getting 80 grams per kilometre, which is still less.
It's still less.
It's still less
than a Prius.
Yeah, a Prius is 89, so it's still impressive. I'll give you that.
Yeah.
But there needs to be some clarification and more.
I mean, what we need is some genuine figures from the oil industry of exactly how much carbon they do really produce, because I've got a sneaking suspicion they're not going to tell us.
Absolutely.
They're not going to want to release that kind of information.
That brings me to my next argument, though, and that is about the practicality, the range of an electric car. We're sitting in a Nissan Leaf right now. Nissan say the car will do about 100 miles. Admittedly, that's with the aircon going. It's got electric windows and other luxuries like a stereo, etc. But even so, 100 miles is not good enough. It's
not good enough for what?
It's rubbish.
If you want to drive to Scotland, it is chronic.
Yeah, well, that's the reason we moved away from the horse and cart, because you had to stop and feed the horses along the way. The reason why we went to the motor vehicles, because it gave us the freedom
to go further,
go where we want, when we want. And being tied into...
the thing is, I think you're absolutely right, and they are not suitable for. They're not the same. You can't compare it to a petrol car. A petrol car is a very different thing. The fundamental problem we're facing is very unlikely in my lifetime and fairly unlikely in your lifetime. It's going to get so prohibitively expensive. It's not going to run out. Fossil fuels aren't going to run out, like as in they just suddenly stop overnight, but they're going to become harder and harder to get, harder and harder to produce, and therefore much more expensive.
Yeah.
We kind of need to do something about that. We kind of need to look for an alternative way of moving ourselves around that doesn't involve burning fossil fuels in very efficient internal combustion engines that are essentially steam age technology. You know, it's pistons, cranks, valves, you know, it's old-fashioned, outdated technology that's hugely inefficient, and we're wasting an incredibly valuable resource which we should be extracting. I'm not opposed to the oil industry because we need it for so many other things: fertilizer, plastics, pharmaceuticals. It's hugely important, and we're wasting it. Ferraris at the weekend on disused airfields driving sideways. They would be. I don't want to stop people doing that.
I want to talk about the battery issue. And you believe that battery technology is progressing all the time, and that we'll get to a point in the future where battery cars, I'm talking about specifically battery electric vehicles, can travel a comparative range to today's petrol.
To a tank of petrol. I think that we won't bother once we get to around 250, 300 miles on a charge. I think no one will bother to make it 1,000 miles or something like that.
I'm going to have to disagree with you on the battery point, is because in 1908, the same year as the Model T, there was I think it was called a Fritkel Victoria or something.
Well, there were more electric cars on the road in 1908 than petrol. So
exactly, yeah. And these cars had the same range as the Nissan Leaf. We're talking about over 100 years ago.
Yeah, but they only went at about 15 miles an hour.
They did, yeah.
So if you drove this at 15 miles an hour, you would be able to probably do 150 miles in it, but you would be quite bored.
Yeah, but you know.
And you'd have a lot of people behind you that were quite annoyed.
Yeah. But my point is that battery technology
right.
isn't progressing at the speed.
I mean, it isn't. I think
that we want it to.
Yes, it hasn't. But if you think of, I think I can only use the mobile phone analogy. I know it's boring, but if you think of how bad mobile phone batteries were, and they were seriously rubbish, only 20 years ago.
I'm going to agree with you to a certain extent. I think when people look at laptop batteries, which is probably a more appropriate area to compare this to, is that laptop batteries haven't progressed that much in the grand scheme of things. Laptops themselves are becoming smarter. They have better power management systems. Exactly. The software can use less software power, and hardware use less power, so we get longer battery life in laptops. But even so, the typical laptop today, you're still looking at about 3-4 hours battery life, and that's not. It's not a massive increase in battery life when you look at laptops of the past. So I think battery life will progress in electric cars, but not at the rate people expect.
Right. The infrastructure we're used to with petrol cars is finite. It's not going to last forever. That would be my counter argument, because all these challenges we have, which are real and need to be acknowledged. It's pointless saying, no, this car is fantastic, it just drives forever. No, it doesn't. You've got to recharge it, you've got to get the electricity from somewhere, which brings up all those arguments about where does electricity come from that is running all these lights. And I have a diesel Land Rover, and when I start that up...
What?
I do! I've had it for years. It's fantastic. It's like an old bread van.
Robert Llewellyn, the EV enthusiast, just said diesels are fantastic.
I'll admit one other thing. If you don't shut the doors of the Mitsubishi i-MiEV properly, if you're a teenager, and Dad hasn't noticed, and the interior light's on, there's a tiny little 12-volt battery that runs the ignition on not the main battery, it's the little one, which goes flat. So I have jump-started an electric car by starting up a diesel Land Rover, and the garage is filled with the filthiest black smoke, full of SOx and NOx emissions, and choking to death.
Because of your electric car?
Because my electric car won't start, because it's got a flat battery. It is the most fun.
I win.
I took you. Every point you made is 100% right. It is going to take a while, and it is going to be a long and hot debate. And I think we should carry on doing it more. I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, no, I half expected fisticuffs today.